Morning.
Hey.
Good morning.
Morning.
You hear me?
Yeah. You might want to turn your recording off until this actually starts.
Yeah, can you just give me a reminder to turn it back on?
Mm-hmm. Or if you make me co-host, I'll turn it on.
Hi, everybody.
Hello there. Hey, Mara, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Very good. Glad you could join us.
Yeah, thank you.
There we go. David, can you hear me? Can everyone hear me?
I can, Craig. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. And you?
Great. Good. Thanks for joining us this morning.
My pleasure.
We have a big crowd. Over 200 people signed up, so we'll see how many actually call in.
Okay, wonderful. David, you're pretty optimistic we'll be done within an hour, right? I've got a pretty hard stop in about an hour.
Yes, Craig. We've been pretty good about wrapping up. There's a lot to cover, but we will give other opportunities to continue the conversation in other forums and other sessions.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Good morning, David, from the far reaches of California.
Good morning, Jeff. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Good morning and good afternoon to some. Good morning to others. We'll be getting started here in a couple minutes. Just waiting for some more people to join.
Good morning, David.
Good morning.
This is the TLD crew in Tennessee. Happy to see you.
Great, glad to have you. So give us one more minute and then we'll get started.
All right.
Hi, David.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, good morning to everybody, or I should say good morning, good afternoon to some, but welcome to all. And thanks for joining us this morning. For those that don't know me, I'm David Walsh, the principal of Zoo Advisors, and we're joined by other members of the Zoo Advisor team. But wanted to give a big welcome. We've had an overwhelming interest in this topic. This is our best attended session. We've been doing these community conversations for the last 3 months. And this one is on a very important topic and has gotten a great response in terms of interest in it. And as the format for these is a conversation, we've invited a number of people to share some thoughts and comments, but I encourage you to use the chat function to share comments or questions, or raise your hands. I think we're all becoming Zoom professionals, so that we know to raise your hand if you want to be called on, and either I will call you out or have one of the other members of our Zoo Advisor team call on you and monitor the participant window. I'd like to start first by saying, I along with all the other members of the Zoo Advisors team, stand in support of all Black people and people of color. I stand against racism and all forms of social injustice and social inequity. But I know that standing in support is only a small thing and not enough, and we need to do something. This 1 hour conversation is a small start, and it's just the beginning. But I will make the commitment, as we've done in the past, to create a space for these conversations and to have this dialogue, and more importantly, to turn it into action. I know as a white male, I've gotten to this place because of the color of my skin and my privilege. And I've been extremely blessed, but know some of where I've come from comes at the cost of others. And I also know that I don't always know exactly what to say or what to do. Every day over the last 2 weeks, as I've gone to write something or say something on this topic, I've hesitated, I've worried. I've wondered, should I say this? Should I ask this? What are the right words? What are the right actions? Stopping and thinking about it is good, but I also know not saying anything is not good because I'm too afraid or too worried. I, like all of us, I think, need to put ourselves out there and be vulnerable and be willing to ask the difficult questions and hear the hard answers. We all need to be asking and listening, and really that's what brings us here today. Again, I'd like to welcome everybody, but also a number of participants that agreed to share some of their thoughts and perspectives on these issues, and particularly what members of us as the zoo and aquarium community can be doing to fight social inequity. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists or participants. First, we have Dr. Bert Davis, who is the president and CEO of America's Black Holocaust Museum. Craig Jacobs, Director of Human Resources and Safety at Omaha's Henry Dorley Zoo. Mara-Lynne Payne, Senior Manager of Inclusion, Equity, and Diversity at Tennessee Aquarium. Amos Morris, Deputy Director and COO at Fresno's Chaffee Zoo, and Curtis Bennett, Director of Equity and Community Engagement at National Aquarium. So thank you. I believe you are all on. I think I checked, so hopefully please unmute yourselves when you have to have something to say. So I'd like to jump right in here and deal with the question or the topic at hand that's been at the forefront for us over the last 2 weeks in dealing with the issue of racism. And starting off by asking a very direct question, because we've really want to put it out there. What's the propensity for system racism in the zoo and aquarium profession, and have any of you experienced that? Any of our panelists would like to jump in with that? Craig or Mara, since I see you on the screen first.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mara-Lynne Payne. I'm with the Tennessee Aquarium. Have an earpiece on. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right, good. So thank you first of all, for the invitation. I think this is a really good opportunity to hear so many voices from across our industry, and I really do appreciate you reaching out. So I can say that personally, I have not personally experienced any type of systemic racism since I've been in the zoo and aquarium profession, which has been almost 29 years now. It'll be 29 years. However, I can say that, you know, if we're not careful, things can lead to systemic racist policies if we allow ourselves to perpetuate stereotypes, if we don't keep our biases in check. And so I think that just being aware of our biases, what those might be, understanding how we feel about certain situations, certain groups of people, and why we feel that way. I think that without having the awareness of what our bias can be and how that can lead to perpetuating stereotypes of others, I think it can lead to racist policies. And that's something as an industry that, you know, I feel that we need to be intentional about. So I think the discussions around these issues are really timely. I think they're very important. They're always uncomfortable, but I think they're necessary.
Thanks, Mara.
David, I'll jump in next.
Thanks, Bert.
First, I want to say good morning and good afternoon to everyone, my former colleagues. As you all know, I've been in the zoo and aquarium world for almost 28 years. I want to first step back and reference something that David said earlier in terms of personal responsibility. I did some work in the DEAI world with zoo advisors about 2 years ago now, David.
Yes.
And Jackie, a few of you, I can see your faces were there. So in our work in DEAI, Kathy, I see you too. The first tenet of working in this space is, to quote Shakespeare, to thine own self be true. So it starts with you first. You as an individual, what have you done in your personal and professional spaces to address these issues around diversity and racism, equity, accessibility, and inclusion? So David, I just wanted to give you a compliment because you wanted to embrace this during one of your office retreats back a couple of years ago. And we haven't been in a lot of contact, but I do know that you have been following up in this space pretty consistently with AZA. So I just want to congratulate you on that.
Thank
and
you.
Also for convening this important work. Okay, so I, along with Mara-Lynne, I have not, I don't believe personally received any racist behavior, but I will say that, and Craig is on this and Jo-Elle is here, and Jackie has been a liaison. The diversity committee, when it first started, hit some serious bumps in the road because, quite frankly, we were asked Why do we need a diversity committee? And when we started sharing some of the, and this, we're not talking, shoot, Craig, what, 15 years ago now? 16, 17 years ago, Jackie? The question was, why do we even need one? And I can remember being in directors retreats and in some other seminars where all the participants on the panel were white men. And they were speaking to subject matter that really embraced all different types of people, especially women and people of color, but we were excluded. We also became stigmatized. So I don't know how that has been manifested in any behaviors, but I have personally been told by people that other people in their groups were like, why are you hanging out with the diversity committee? Like we were plagued, like we were doing something that was not commonplace or acceptable in the zoo and aquarium world. And when they pushed back and said, well, what do you mean? Those guys are cool. I mean, they're trying to make change. They're like, this won't last. It's not that, it won't last. Those kind of undergirdings of thought can be precipitated into behaviors. Now, I started out before saying, I don't think I personally have, but I do know of some people of color who were overqualified for positions of middle management or above, who were told they were not qualified. And then that institution turned around and hired someone who was woefully unqualified. So not me personally, but I've made some observations.
Thanks, Bert.
David, I'll go ahead and.
Okay, thanks, Amos.
Thank you for putting this on. I remember a conversation you had hosted, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years ago on this very topic. Bert, it was a pleasure seeing your face on the screen, so I miss you. I can say I've been subject to racism in our profession, denied opportunity, and supervised individuals that had a hard time taking direction from a Black man. I have 7 institutions in my experience. I've been in the zoo profession since 1987. And I can honestly say I left institutions so that I could be in a place where I could be accepted and treated as an equal. One of the things that I think is interesting is that I've not been a part of the diversity committee. I purposely left myself out of that discussion. I did my best to hide within the animal collection that I cared for and focused my attention on animal care and representing a few species where I believe I was recognized for that species before I was recognized for being a Black man in this industry, in some cases, which I think benefited me to a certain extent, opposed to my other colleagues of color. So navigating this profession has been a very thoughtful endeavor for myself to not be the first at anything, but to do the best that is within my personal skills and provide for my family. So, thank you.
Thank you, Amos.
David, I'd like to comment if I could, please. Good morning to everyone. David, thank you so much to you and Zoo Advisors for hosting this. It's great to see everybody, Bert and Jo-Elle and Amos and Mara. Jackie. Great to see everyone. I think this is an exceptional forum that you're putting together here, and I sincerely hope that the impact is far-reaching and that it continues to gain momentum. In response to your question, I've not experienced any racism here in Omaha, but I will say this. I don't think that I'd be in this position, as you mentioned, David, in some of your comments earlier about personal responsibility. I'm relatively new to this business. I'm not a career zoo person. I came from a military background. But one of our board members in my exposure here in the Omaha community felt that I would be an asset to the zoo community as a person of color. And so he recommended that I join the zoo team. And that's really the reason that I'm here. And that in and of itself has turned into a 22-year career here with zoos and aquariums. But it's been with the assistance of the likes of learning from Amos and Bert and Jo-Elle and others, and spending time with Jackie throughout this 22-year career of mine to help further the cause of just this social equity that we all so deserve and that I feel is critical to us. But if one of our board members had not had just that personal responsibility to say, hey, I think that this person of color is going to enhance what we do at Omaha Zoo, he took a stand. And I hold him in high regard for encouraging me to take this position, because I can tell you when I left the military, this is not where I was headed. And I wouldn't go, when I look at this screen and I see all of the faces and those of you that I've encountered and who've helped me along, I wouldn't go anywhere else. And so I think that this discussion is very timely, and I think it's very necessary. And I will do my part to help us continue this conversation.
Thanks, Craig. Curtis, are you also on the line?
Yeah. So I just also want to echo everyone's sentiments for just thank you for the opportunity to be a part of the dialogue and conversation. You know, it's something that's incredibly important, especially for us as our individual institutions, our industry, and for our society moving forward. I think just to echo another statement that was made, you know, it does really start at the individual level. You know, when I think of the work that needs to happen, you know, it's individually, it's institutionally, and it's at the industry levels. And all three of those things influence each other in really dynamic ways. On a personal note, personally, I have not experienced any racism, you know, during my 5 years time in the zoo and aquarium community. However, similar to other statements, I do know people who have. And, you know, even thinking bigger picture than that, within the broader environmental community, that is where I have experienced some of the racism that we're speaking to today. But, you know, I think going back to what we were saying initially, it really does start at that individual level, looking at those stereotypes, the biases, thinking about those microaggressions that are happening. Also, you know, reflecting back on our policies, procedures, not just what we do, but how we do it within our institutions and our industry.
Curtis, we lost your...
How about now?
There we go.
All right. Yeah, so if we're not careful, you know, those systemic issues will continue to magnify. We really can't allow for that to happen.
Thanks so much. Jo-Elle, I know you're on the line and several people have called you out. I wonder if you'd like to say a couple of words as well.
Sure. Thank you, David, and thanks for everyone for joining the call. I think this time is different than other times where we've had this conversation. And I do agree with what has been said, but I also want to say that really where we are right now is looking at institutional racism and looking at structural racism. And I think part of that is for us in our profession is really looking at the history and understanding the context with which our organizations were born and started. And so I have been fortunate to work in a variety of organizations that are at least approaching or over 100 years old. And when you align that history with the history of African Americans or people of color in this country, a different narrative emerges. A different narrative emerges about who was being served, who was able to come, and in that context, who was thought of in terms of people who could run the organization, staff the organization, and who could visit. And so with that then becomes some of the broader issues and calls to action that you hear about dismantling systemic racism. And so I would bet most of our organizations are a part of systemic racism. And the call is actually to begin to dismantle that. They were set up, many of them, some of them by people who were wealthy and who could travel the world and wanted to have animals shown to the regular common folk. That is inherent in systemic racism, just that structure and desire in and of itself. And I think really what the call to action is, and I'm hoping why many of you are on this call, is to really begin to look and dissect your organizations, to really think about how to rebuild them in a way that is truly equitable. And that really means digging back in time and understanding both historical context and contemporary context and how this actually shows up today. So if you are under indexing in your organization with your communities of color, whoever that may be, or with non-white educated people who tend to be the bulk of our audience, then you need to start dissecting and doing some work. And I think that's really sort of the call to action. Have I experienced racism in organizations that I've worked in? Yeah, was it intentional? Probably not. I have been asked to clean bathrooms just because I'm Black and happen to be walking around with a name tag. I have been mistaken for colleagues at conferences, and I know some of my African American colleagues have also been mistaken, they're chuckling, for other colleagues for whom they don't look anything like. Again, not intentional, but those are the sorts of things, and that's where you get this, the microaggressions and the slow erosion, I think, that leads to the eruption that you're seeing now. Have I been concerned about conferences and locations of conferences? Absolutely. If you guys remember the South Carolina, or was it North Carolina conference? South Carolina conference, that one was a doozy for African American people, and it sounds like it was a doozy for some of our white colleagues, but we never really had the space to really talk about that together. So these are some of the things that I think we can do moving forward that is within our missions to do it, because we can't meet our missions without addressing this particular issue, because colonialism is part of the root of conservation and why these problems exist now that we're trying to fix with species. Those are rooted in colonialism. And so part of the urgency and action now is to understand that history, to go back and not have people like me or Bert or some of the other callers do it yourself. There's a range of resources out there.
Thanks, Jo-Elle. I'd love to hear some of the other panelists' comments on what they see as the role of zoos in addressing racism and systematic inequities.
I can jump in. I think it's critical. It has to be at the forefront of what we do and how we do it. Because whether intentionally or not, as Jo-Elle mentioned, we're part of systems. And, we have to be able to reflect and assess and analyze, all of the different things that we do. And I really appreciated, Jo-Elle, the mention of the historical context as well. That's another really important piece of the journey. So, and I have said this within our own institution, it's saying, is what Jo-Elle mentioned as well, is that we cannot achieve what our missions are. You know, and even beyond that, as a society, you know, we can't get to a place where things are equitable until we tackle some of these foundational challenges. And, you know, it is going to take some time, absolutely. Is it going to take a lot of intentionality and resources? Yes. And we have to be committed as an industry to do that work.
Thanks, Curtis.
I'll jump in next because I just want to follow up and piggyback on a word that Curtis just used, and that's resources. So I do believe that this will take some time and some tremendous intentionality, but because of the resources that are out there, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So I'll give you some examples, because I don't believe that there's going to be any true change, any systemic institutional change, even though I led off by saying you've got to look in the mirror. There's got to be policies and procedures that I think have been referenced before. I would challenge us to look to our colleagues at AAM. I'm currently a board member of AAM, and just to give you a little update on their intentionality, they have hired a director of inclusion and equity and accessibility as part of the AAM team now. Back in 2017, I think it was, or 2016, I was the national program chair for one of their conference that they dedicated only to DEAI. No major membership umbrella organization has ever done that before. The entire conference was based on DEAI. So we received a couple of years ago, and I know, David, you and I have talked about this, over $3 million grant to do board development as relates to DEAI. And we will be updated on their progress next month during our July board meeting. So there are some institutional efforts that have been made already that we don't have to recreate. I think, I know Dan has had some communications or constant communications with Laura Lott, who was our CEO. So there's been some cross-fertilization in this regard, but I do believe that even though we as individuals may suffer or may be involved with this, institutionalization of these policies and procedures and practices will make sure that they are, they go well beyond our being there in these institutions. One of the things that was always a craw that stuck in my craw was the diversity committee continuously tried to get a commitment from AZA to at least put some question about an individual's diversity committee activities, having a diversity statement as part of the accreditation for AZA institutions. And I'm not sure if that ever happened, but it seemed to be, they just fought us tooth and nail about a question, which to me, I thought was really, really interesting and gave me some personal insight as to how serious they really were in terms of embracing this. So I'm not sure if that's changed, but there were some things that we wanted to do on an institutional level that we met with some pushback.
Thank you. Another question kind of related to the our mission is, we've talked a lot about organizations being accessible. And are we really doing that? And what does accessibility really mean? Craig, do you have any thoughts or comments?
We're working diligently through our education department to expand how we attract all segments of our community to programs here at the zoo. I think that the efforts that are being expended in some of our lower income communities here in Omaha are beginning to bear fruit. It hasn't translated into employment for some of the kids just yet, but I think we are making progress. And I think that we have significant work to do yet in enhancing the family unit to attend as a family. I don't think we're doing very well in that respect. But we are working diligently at that. And I think that the efforts, I applaud our education folks for some of the outreach efforts that they are doing. And it's beginning to take hold and have some impact for us.
Thanks, Craig.
I'm going to jump in as well and say, to me, when I think about accessibility, it really starts with the who. You know, when we think about centering equity or centering inclusion, I know it manifests itself in different ways for different audiences as to what needs to happen to make something truly accessible. So we have to take that deep dive, and it starts with listening. We have to be listening to be able to understand what our audience's barriers are. And not only just listening, we have to actively begin to dismantle some of those barriers and work collaboratively to do so moving forward. So, you know, I'll give a good example for some work that's happening in Baltimore. You know, for one of our project sites, there is conversation about equitable access for the communities. And the first question I always have is I challenge our group to say, what does that mean? Because there are about 8 different communities, and that's just geographically. If you break that down even further and you look at things like identities, you know, interest groups and things like that, you know, that becomes even more detailed as to what different audiences need to make something truly accessible to them. And, you know, we have to do our due diligence to dig into that.
Great thoughts, Curtis. Mara-Lynne, any thoughts on accessibility?
Yeah, he actually said everything that I was going to say. I don't feel like you can have true accessibility until we have no barriers to our facilities, to our properties, to our exhibits, to our resources, to our expertise. And so I feel that partnering with others, that collaborative effort is going to be key. In our community, in Chattanooga, we have a community that's 2 to 3 miles, maybe a little bit further from our facilities. And access to our facility can be difficult. Some people don't have the transportation.
Mara-Lynne, I think we lost you there.
Of a city where all of our citizens can't visit. And so that's a problem. So you don't have true accessibility until everyone has access in some form, whether that's physical access, where it is access through the schools, through our informal education, through our websites, through our messaging, our expertise, all of those things, to me, in my opinion, makes us more accessible to others. And I don't think we can have true accessibility without those.
Great, thank you. Other comments on the accessibility issue?
I'll just remind everyone, and I know just looking around that many of you have been in the education space. A lot of us started our careers with each other in the education space. And one of the first prime tenets of education is you meet your audience where they are, and then you bring them along to where you want them to be. So I don't think we can truly be accessible unless once, and I agree with wholeheartedly what Curtis said, we have to listen and embrace what our audiences are telling us they need and what they want. Because if we don't start out by listening, it's not going to work. It's just going to be lip service to them. So meet our audiences where they are and bring them along to where you want them to be, which is engage with our institutions internally and externally.
Great, thanks, Bert.
And just to add to that as well, like in terms of some of those dynamics, you know, this idea of social inequity and social justice, you know, we've got to also, you know, think about how we're plugging into that environmental justice space too. Again, things are inherently intertwined. So really understanding, again, you know, meeting people where they are to understand what those underlying challenges are, you know, and how are we actually incorporating that into what we do. As individual institutions and as an industry.
Great. Thanks. One of the other questions, and Amos, I think you brought this up 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. We were part of a discussion at the AZA Directors Policy Conference on diversity and increasing diversity in the leadership ranks. I mean, this conversation's been going on for a while. We've been involved with it for the last couple of years, but honestly, it doesn't seem like we're making much progress. You know, in terms of, if you look at the demographics at the CEO, director level, we are failing. I think that's pretty clear. Thoughts on how we can do better and how we can start moving that quicker in terms of increasing diversity at all levels, but you know, maybe specifically at that leadership level. Amos, any thoughts? Because you gave us such an eloquent talk when we had that opportunity at Directors Policy Conference.
Well, I actually think we've done, you know, it's not the best, but we've definitely done better. I'm no longer the only African Americans sitting in an administrative position in AZA at this point. There are now a little more than one handful. And that's a heck of a lot better than it was when I moved into the ranks. So I do see some progress. I'm also a strong believer is in kids have to see their own in positions of authority and responsibility. That ultimately demonstrates that it's accessible to them. And as we now have a handful of African American administrators, I think the momentum will build. The other piece to the challenge is I want to be in the position because I am a capable, intelligent individual, and I want to make sure that is forefront in my selection. So for me, that's many years of experience that's added to that. And as we see in our profession, there's not a lot of younger people of color in positions where they can gain that experience. So it will continue to be a challenge, but I do see hope opposed to where it was many years back. So we have to continue on, but purposely continue on.
Great, thanks, Amos.
I'll jump in next. So I think we have to do two things kind of simultaneously. Just referring to what Amos has talked about, we've got to create that pipeline of people who can move through the ranks, who start off as keepers and then become curators and then become managers. That has been the natural progression. But we also have to look at what we have currently in terms of the pipeline and where we are in the development of the pipeline, the mentoring process for the pipeline, the access to prepare people to move up the management pipeline, if in fact they want to do so. There's always going to be a handful of people who don't want to do that. But I think we also have to be simultaneously realistic about how many people we have in the pipeline, and then start to look for people like Craig, who never came through the zoo and aquarium positions, but has become a true leader in our industry. And so I think we need to be smart about bringing people who have not been embedded in a zoo and aquarium position into the fold. And I think that will speed the pipeline, and that will speed the ability for us to change the fabric and the landscape of our leadership in our institutions. So we've got to develop the pipeline within. We've got to find qualified people that are out there who will be willing to come into this industry and work and do a very, very favorable job, if not an excellent job, like Craig has displayed.
Thanks, Bert. And I think that's a great comment, and that we have to look not just within our own ranks, but out in other industries and other professions, and bring them into the field, because as we all know, zoos and aquariums are complex businesses, and it's not just the animal side. You need a range of skills, and you can get that from lots of different places. Jo-Elle, I know you had a comment as well.
Yeah, thanks. There are a couple of things, and I think your question illustrates the intersection between professional and personal. And so the part of the reality is, and this will get to sort of what people can do personally that intersects with their profession. Part of the weight, the added weight that I think people of color, particularly, I will speak as an African-American person, is this weight of where am I safe? And I think the recent spate of events really sort of point to not safe in most places, but we know that. We've known that our whole lives. We've known that for generations. And so we deal with it. But when it comes to questions of leadership and open positions, one of the questions that I ask, and that I wonder if some of my other colleagues of color have asked, is, wow, this is a really interesting position, maybe a great organization, but am I, as an individual, as my family, going to be safe? And that may be very different than my white colleagues. That may not be a question. That's a question for me. And so I think that in your personal lives and your professional lives, depending on where your organizations are, what are you doing? What can you do to make sure that your organization is safe and your community is safe? And that may border on the personal side of things, but that's a question. There are some organizations that I likely would never work at because I would not bring my family to that town. I may visit, but that's not where I'm comfortable and where I want to live. And so I think that's another issue that it behooves us, and why this conversation is so important, is because if we want to create more opportunity in our profession, we're going to have to make sure that we are creating safe communities and places throughout this country where people feel as though they can live and be comfortable. And that is not what's happening. And again, that's why we're at this moment, because if you're African American, just doing day-to-day living is a bit challenging. And it has been, it's not new, but because of that, because of COVID, this is just more weight where we're like, no, that's extra. I'm not willing to take on a new organization, the challenge of leadership, along with worrying about my family every day. I can't be the most productive leader I can be.
Thanks, Jo-Elle. I know we have 2 hands raised here. Jackie, would you like to make a comment?
Sure. So first, David, thank you for organizing this, and it's great to be with you all. And so glad that we are having this conversation, even though I'm sad it took all of the current events that we have for us to have it. David, I think you asked a great question about, so what do we need to do? I think you asked that question. And one piece is I obviously continue in this conversation, but the other part of that for me is really figuring out how to be honest about this. I think we sort of inadvertently, unintentionally asked several people to talk about what their experiences were, almost all of whom very politely said, oh, no, I've been fine. I think we kind of inadvertently asked you guys once again to tell us white people how we've screwed up. And I think what we probably need to do is we white people need to start admitting what we've seen, because again, you guys were very polite and very sweet, but I believe that there is systemic racism in our profession. And I think I think that it is, as many of you said, I think it's really almost probably entirely unintentional, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I think we have to figure out a way for all of us to be honest about that and to call it when we see it and to deal with it. And we can't put people of color in the position of carrying that burden of telling us when they see it. We have to, white people have to be able to say it. So just my perspective.
Thank you, Jackie. And Kathy Wagner, you also had your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, David. And my comment relates to what Jackie just said, and also to a comment that came up earlier about accessibility specifically, and how broad and deep our unintentional, I believe it's unintentional bias and systemic racism is. I know from a consulting perspective, when we've done interviews with our clients, sometimes I've encountered, well, we need to bring the community in, this vast community out there, code speak for God knows what. And then someone will say, yes, but they just want free tickets. And the conversation stops. And we know that's not true. We know in our hearts that's not true. But I think we need the language to speak up and say, first of all, it isn't a they, it isn't the community. And what makes you think they just want free tickets? It's not a question of not being able to afford. It's a question of not being or not feeling welcome. And I think we really, as a white woman, as a white executive, I don't always think I address that the right way. So we do need to call it.
Thanks, Kathy. The question, and this actually, maybe the question is worded wrong here based on what Kathy had said, but I'll read it as I had originally written it. How can we as a community kind of build on the momentum, seeming willingness for dialogue and change and the energy, and also I think the anger, begin to affect the change now? And maybe it's not how can we as a community, but how can we as individuals within the larger community begin to affect change? And any thoughts? I mean, we've had some good suggestions here throughout, but any thoughts from our panelists? And Craig, I know you have to jump off the call exactly at 1 o'clock Eastern time, so I'll throw that out to you and see if you have anything to offer.
Just in closing, I'd like to echo, I think Jackie's hit the nail on the head here. This self-reflection that we have to do will translate into momentum in how we carry ourselves. The willingness, the fortitude, and the ability to express when it's not right. As Kathy said, we've got to just stand up and say it and not allow the innuendo to carry the conversation. Be explicit and be specific. And if we start that at the individual level, I believe, and I have hope that it will translate into the greater good.
Great, thanks. Amos, since you popped up on my screen, any thoughts on what we should be, thoughts on how we can really?
Well, one thing that we had a conversation here at Fresno Chaffee, and there was a discussion on is it our place to speak out? Is it in our mission? Is it a part of our discussion? And with much thought, it is. Diversity is a part of everything that we do as a profession, from animal care to ecosystems to conservation to communicating to our community. I think zoos and aquariums know the language, have the ability to interpret the needs to our community. And I think it is very much a part of how we fit in our community. So when this whole conversation recently popped up, and with COVID, coming to work, focusing on trying to get our zoos back open, we had a young lady in the zoo ask, when are we going to take a stand? And I had to stand back and ask myself, when are we going to take a stand? And the stand is now. I think we can't just talk about it. We can't just verbalize it to one another. We've got to reach out into our community. We have the vehicle to do it. We have the educators to do it. We have experience to do it. And our institutions can play a role in this conversation. So I encourage all of you to look inwardly and look at the tools that we have to continue this on.
Great. Thanks, Amos. Mara-Lynne, I know you said you got bumped off a couple times, but thoughts in terms of how we can build off this momentum here and begin to make some real change?
Well, I think that, first of all, I don't know if this was mentioned when I got kicked off. I was really happy to see that AZA came out with the public statement. I feel that a lot of zoos and aquariums also adopted that statement and took a public stance and showing support for, the various activities that are going on. I feel like if we have not adopted those that statement and that positioning, zoos and aquariums should come out with their own statement and positioning. So forgive me if I'm repeating that, but I felt that was really important. This particular dialogue is also important. I feel that a safe space for these types of discussions in our organizations and among ourselves is critical. And I read a quote someplace that this is an eruption of consciousness. I heard that someplace, and I wrote it down, and I think that's so true. There's an eruption of consciousness. So now is just the time to listen to voices that haven't been heard, to find our own way of standing in solidarity with those voices, but also to be clear about what we stand for as an industry, as individual organizations, and how to make our voices heard along with those others. So I, again, just appreciate this opportunity, appreciate the opportunity to listen to others and to give some feedback.
Thank you. Curtis, thoughts here as we come to the close of the hour?
Yeah, absolutely. I think number one that I've thought of, at least initially, as we're in the situations we are right now, acknowledging that people are feeling a lot of pain, right? There's a lot of that emotional pain that people are feeling. Personally, I can speak to the fact that the last weeks have been rough, just to process everything and to navigate that space. And so I think that's an important step, especially when thinking about organizational dialogue, internally especially. So thinking strategically, thinking thoughtfully of how do we approach those conversations? And knowing that it is also a continuing conversation. It's a continual journey. And it does start individually, and it does start internally within our organizations. The first thought might be to think about the external stuff, and that is important, but the sustainable changes need to happen internally. So prioritizing that time to really dig deep into that internal piece is critical.
Great, thank you, Curtis. And Bert, some last thoughts here as we approach the end?
Well, I think that based on what Amos has said and in consideration of some of the things that AZA has employed, the executive leadership Council, I think it's called, or program. I think that there have been some sustainable programs that we should, as institutions of AZA, should continue and expand. But I also want to go back and circle back to something that I referred to earlier, and that is not having to recreate the wheel. That there are some organizations out there that are doing this work and doing it rather successfully. And I would refer you once again to talk to our colleagues at AAM, at AAAM, the African American Museum Association, Aztec. There's a lot of associations that have been trying to embrace this DEAI from their perspective, utilizing their constituencies. And so I think there's some lessons learned. I would advise us to always seek the best practices, but also ask for the worst practices so we don't have to repeat them again. There has been some considerable progress. There obviously is overwhelming progress that needs to be attained. So I think we need to be prudent in doing the things that have been done well and continue to do them well and enhance them and make them more pan-institutional as it relates to AZA, but then seek some counsel and work with some of our colleagues that have been pretty successful in doing this for the last decade or so, and apply some of those principles that are very specific to AZA, and not worry about the things that are specific to them.
That's great advice, and lots of good resources out there. And Jo-Elle, any last thoughts?
My mute button. Yeah, just really quick, part of the conversation that you're hearing now that we are all a part of is around privilege. And so I think one of the things is that we all have privilege. In different ways, it shows up very differently, but we all have privilege. And I think, David, you have, and Chaffee, you guys have exercised your privilege as consultants to drive the conversation by organizing this. I think my fellow African-American colleagues have used our privilege as trusted colleagues, respected colleagues in this profession to do this. And I think it's important that the rest of the folks on the call, particularly if you are white, use your privilege to, again, stand up when needed, stand down when needed, to challenge and really do the homework that you may not have done before, to understand the context and history of your organization, your town, and then use that privilege, because that's privilege that myself and my African American colleagues don't have, to really make change. And that's really what this call is about. And that's really sort of the thing that, in my opinion, has shifted, is that the issues that have transpired over more publicly over the past few weeks has removed benefit of the doubt, which is often a strategy, but has allowed, I think, white America to really sort of see that systemic racism is real, whether or not it's intended, and it all has an impact, but that racism isn't a Black people problem. What we're seeing is a white people problem. Therefore, we need our white allies to help address it. And all people, all communities, all cultures have their own issues. But where the work needs to reside systemically is on the white people side, because Black people didn't create systemic racism. They didn't necessarily benefit from it. But now that it's clear, that is really sort of the call, and how can we work that within our organization's missions to make sure that that happens is really, I think, what you see as the national request. It's my request individually. I can't speak for the rest of my colleagues, but that's my request, is that really sort of looking at this and saying, how can I use my privilege, whatever privilege I have, to do this? I would guess, and I will look at my colleagues that I can see, David, if you would have had this call 2 weeks ago, we might not have been able to do it.
Yep.
Because it was too heavy at that point. So that would be my sort of call to action is do the research, do the homework. The resources are out there. All you got to do is Google. You can find them. A book, White Fragility, is sold out on Amazon as a recommended reading. So, I mean, take advantage of this opportunity and this momentum and keep going and use your privilege, whatever privilege you may have in whatever communities those privileges exist in.
Thank you, Jo-Elle, and so well said. Really appreciate those comments. And I want to say thank you to all of our main speakers, Bert, Craig, who had to jump off the line, Mara-Lynne, Amos, Curtis, and Jo-Elle. I really appreciate hearing from you. Great thoughts and perspectives. You know, the one word that I'm in my head at the moment right now is listening. I need to do a better job of listening and learning. And as I said at the beginning, we as an organization, as a company, will commit to continuing this dialogue. I don't want this to be the one and only call. And so we will be looking for other formats and other venues to have more conversation and maybe even some more in-depth work. So appreciate it. We will be sharing a summary as well as a link to this video, as well as the resources that were in the chat. We will send it out to everybody who registered for the session. And just check our website for future webinars and talks, and we will be sending out information. You know, follow us on email for more resources. But again, thank you to everybody. Really appreciate it. Really great conversation and important conversation that we continue. So thanks everybody, and have a great afternoon and a great day. See you.